On the night of Thursday, May 28th, I was standing in front of a burning liquor store at the corner of East Lake Street and Minnehaha Avenue in Minneapolis. 3 days had passed since the killing of George Floyd by police, and I'd been at that intersection for 6 hours watching and reporting on the frustration growing. I talked about it for 90 seconds. I described the scene in detail to my colleague Brian Williams, who was anchoring in New York City, and I was concerned that the impression a viewer might get from watching a police station overcome and of buildings burning was that of a riot, or that Minneapolis itself was burning. And it wasn't. So I wanted to emphasize that there had been and remained an overwhelming majority of the protesters who were peaceful and not participating in any violence. So I did, for about 20 seconds after my minute-and-a-half report. And that 20 seconds is the only part of several days of reporting that the right-wing media continues to circulate. In fact, by late in the presidential campaign, an inaccurate blending of the events of those days became a regular laugh line for Donald Trump, who repeatedly told rallygoers some version of this story about how the media embraced, downplayed, and encouraged violence. That 20-second clip of my reporting, without the context, made its way to the floor of Congress as part of a hearing. But here's the truth. Most of the media did not excuse or condone violence. Some of us, like me, did work hard to contextualize it. And there is a distinction between the violent protests and protests that have violence. Now, critics wonder, why is there widespread revulsion at the violence at the Capitol when I and others have spent months trying to say that violence can be a necessary part of protest? Well, for starters, the Capitol is not a liquor store. Rabbi Yossi Levine of the Manhattan Jewish Center sent that line in a message to his congregants about the attack, saying of the Capitol, quote, "When someone breaks its windows, it's not criminal mischief. It's an assault on democracy and decency." And that is the point. Violence must always be understood in context. The violence of the anti-apartheid movement, the civil rights movement, the Indian independence campaign, any violence at all that fights injustice is violence with meaning behind it, born of the failure of other means and methods of redress. The killing of Ahmaud Arbery by white vigilantes in Georgia and of George Floyd by Minneapolis police are facts, authenticated and witnessed on video by millions. Violence that means to spread democracy and injustice and encourage fairness in the application of the rule of law has nothing at all in common with the wanton anti-democratic riots of January 6th, fueled by Donald Trump and QAnon conspiracy theories of an election that was stolen. January 6th was a violent insurrection in support of a coup attempt and should be met with nothing but universal scorn. And if you doubt the severity and determination of that mob, we learned that while the Secret Service says Vice President Mike Pence was secure, they moved him to a nearby safe room just 1 minute before the insurrectionists got to the Senate floor. They apparently wanted to hang him. The effect of violence, the loss of life, of property, of the potential for prosperity that often hits those people who are on the same side as the protesters, cannot be ignored and has not been ignored. But to compare the underlying goals of protests about injustice that have become violent at their edges to an anti-democratic uprising with violent aims at its core, fueled by lies and conspiracy theories, is simply to ignore history.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.